What's up, everybody? I'm Talor, and I started this channel to share my own personal recovery journey. I share what's worked for me and what hasn't worked for me and what is still working for me today. I provide free resources, information, suggestions. I'm willing to answer any questions in the comments. My intention is to guide people towards healing. And I wanted to speak about how much and how challenging and how hard it has been since I've been in recovery to repair the relationship with my 9-year-old. I've been sober since 2020, and it didn't matter that I was sober because I wasn't emotionally available to her. I didn't set boundaries with her at a young age. I didn't communicate in a healthy way with her. I was a very agitated person. I was always in a bad mood. I was extremely depressed. My mental health was like the worst it had ever been. So I wasn't healthy myself. I wasn't even emotionally available to myself. And so when I came to recovery about 3 years ago, and I started working on myself, and I started healing things within myself, I started being able to heal my relationship with my daughter. For years, she didn't want me to hug her. She didn't want any affection. And it's hard in the beginning of recovery. It's hard getting sober. And for me, it was hard because every single day I was faced with the consequences of the choices that I had made that had flowed into my relationships with my child, with my spouse, and the relationship I had, or should I say, had not had with myself yet. So I just wasn't hurting myself. I was hurting my entire family. And I needed more than 12-step programs. I started off in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm still active in Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't go to meetings every day like I did in the beginning because I've balanced my schedule out and I do other recovery programs. But when I started Adult Children's of Alcoholics and Dysfunctions, it's a 12-step program, and it focuses on childhood dysfunction. That was an extremely hard program for me to start. And when I found ACA, I was actually on my 4th step in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I had built a somewhat solid foundation. I had built a solid enough foundation that gave me the ability to face myself in ACA. And in ACA, they say at every meeting, if you can attend 6 consecutive meetings, then you have what it takes to make this program work. And I was also coming off all of my psych meds at the time I started attending ACA. And I remember going to my first ACA meeting and holding back my tears. And I was so anxious and angry and sad, just sitting there and listening to other people share their experience, strength, and hope of their own childhood dysfunction. But not just that, just the readings in the beginning of the meeting I so connected to. And I remember leaving my first meeting of ACA and crying and sobbing in my car for all the way home and quite some bit. And when I cry like that, it physically drains me. And so by me being introduced to my childhood dysfunction in a different way than what I was used to talking about, that's my wild raccoons chasing my cat. But when it's I heard it in a different language. I would complain about my family members, and I would tell people the things that had happened to me, but the way that they speak about it in ACA was a different way than what I was used to. And so it was different. And so by the time I bounced back, because it took me several days, I was very emotionally low. And during these days, I did not stop doing my daily commitments. I did at least 2 meetings in Alcoholics Anonymous. I was involved in service work. I was involved in inner work. I kept myself busy with a lot of inner work. You know, and that's why I always say, because this is a part of my story, that I needed more than 12-step programs. I bought every single kind of self-development book a person can imagine. I have so many workbooks, and I would actually work in these workbooks. And that's what I did in my free time. And so by the time I was bouncing back and starting to feel better, it was time to go to another ACA meeting. And so I did that for about 3 weeks. And that 4th meeting, I started feeling a lot better. And so my point is that I had to be willing to push through the pain. I had to be willing to feel the pain in order to make ACA work for me. And so they have many different workbooks in ACA. I started working out the Loving Parent Guidebook, and I really like that book. It has a lot of exercises in them, and they are so silly. They really are. But they work. And I couldn't just do an exercise once. I had to make these exercises a part of me. I had to turn these exercises into habits. And, you know, I feel like for me in my recovery journey, when I truly learned, like, to forgive myself for the past, and I mean truly forgive myself for the pain that I had caused my child by not being emotionally available, I feel like that is when I was able to show up more as a mom. The more recovery I had, the more solid structure I had and the foundation I had. And by coming into ACA and actually talking about things that I did not want to talk about, and feeling those things and allowing myself to cry, allowing myself to grieve, okay, which was a process for me. And I'll use this as an example. So I've been in ACA for almost 2 years, active like once a week. And I remember probably about 2 months ago, I was working out of this workbook I have that's not 12-step. It's called Peaceful Parent, Happy Kid. It's by Laura Markham. And in this workbook, it's so interesting because the first part of the workbook teaches the parent how to heal themselves first. And the second half is how to develop parenting skills and how to rebuild your relationship with your child. And the first part of the book, the exercises that Dr. Laura Markham suggests are the same exercises ACA addresses, counseling. And so it's not just 12-step programs that suggest these exercises. It's basically the whole world that does. That whole genre, that whole field, right? It's psychology in general, counseling, whatever term you want to use. And so I remember opening that parent workbook, and the first thing it wanted me to do was write a forgiveness letter to myself. And I could never bring myself to do it because every time I would try, this was before I came into recovery, every time I would try to work out of this parenting workbook, the guilt and the shame and the resentment that came up was so intense that I couldn't finish the exercise because I didn't know how to cope with the pain. And by me actually coming to 12-step programs and having the opportunity to allow other people to teach me, to guide me, and to show me how to change, I was then able to go back to this workbook and work on it when I built a solid foundation in my recovery. And the thing about me and my recovery is I can't just open the workbook and read, you know, a section or a page or do one exercise. Like, these things have to be done repetitively in order for them to become a part of my natural programming. And so the reason I'm creating this video is because it took a long time for my 9-year-old to be able to allow me to show her affection, okay? And when I saw that she wanted affection and she wanted to be around me. That let me know that I was working my recovery, that whatever that I was doing on a daily basis was paying off because it was showing up in my relationship with my child. And it's been so challenging for me because I've always struggled with self-regulation because I was not taught how to regulate my emotions. And it has been so hard for me since I've been in recovery to learn how to just pause, to learn how to not, when I'm aggravated, talk in a mean tone. I don't put my kid down. I'm not, emotionally, like, I'm not critical. I'm not things like that, but just the way that my tone can sound can sometimes make her feel sad, because by coming to ACA, these things were pointed out to me. And I realized that my mother and my grandmother spoke in the same tone that I have developed, that I have used with my children. And so I never thought that I would get to a place in my recovery where I would become self-aware enough to pause and to think before I responded and how I was going to respond. I never thought that I would actually have the power to change my tone and my voice. And today I can. I'm not perfect at it, by no means. I'm a human being, but the most important thing is that I am aware when I could have done it a little bit differently, and I take that situation and I come outside and I self-reflect to see what was internally going on with me, and I come up with a solution, so next time maybe I can apply the solution through action and I can do it differently. I can think before I speak. And so recovery isn't about enlightenment. It's not about being able to just be perfect. It's about taking responsibility when I could have done something a little bit different. It's about pausing and thinking before I respond. And I was also the type of person, if I was angry, if I was sad, my tone, it's hard. It's hard for me to mask. I've never been able to mask. People that know me, they know when something's off with me, And I've learned to accept that part of me instead of trying to bust my ass to change that part of me. And when I am sad, I'll tell my daughter, hey, I'm feeling a little bit sad right now, And so just by letting people know that out loud, letting her know that, it lets her know that it's not her that's making me sad. By me being able to come to her and say, hey, I shouldn't have talked to you in that tone. I'm working on myself. I'm going to try to do better next time. That means the world to a child. And I tried to give what wasn't giving to me. And I take that perspective and I ask myself when I pause, what did little Talor need as a child? What did little Talor want as a child? And that pause, I've learned, because before I used to think that I had to have a response automatically, right? But I'm learning, and I've learned that I can pause as long as I want to, And my daughter sees me modeling this behavior. And with her being a child, she doesn't have the tools I have. She doesn't have the knowledge, the lived experience. So it's a lot harder for her to learn how to regulate her own emotions. And the only way that my child is learning is from me. And so she learned from me her whole life of how I used to be before recovery. And now I'm able to model something different. And my point is it takes time. It takes time to repair relationships when a person gets sober. It could take however long it could take. And sometimes relationships don't get repaired. And I have had a personal experience where that has been the case for me also with the child I have. So, ACA really helped me identify the characteristics in myself that I had took on from my grandmother and my mother. And what's really interesting to me is that my mother wasn't in my life every day. I saw her a couple years and talked to her on the phone sometimes, but she was obviously in my life enough to where I took on her characteristics, a lot of her characteristics. And I used to say growing up, I will never be like my mother. And I turned exactly like my mother. And that is the system of family dysfunction. We learn through observation as children. And I think science says the first 7 years is the most critical years of a child's development. And so, you know, I never, my entire life, neither my mother or my grandmother never took responsibility for anything, never apologized to me. And when I was in Alcoholics Anonymous, which I still am, when I got to the amends step with my first sponsor, I totally forgot to leave my kids out. I totally didn't even think about it. And when I got my second sponsor, we went through the steps again. And I had realized, oh my gosh, I never did an amends to my children. And so I did an amends. But there's two different types of amends. There's a written, there's an oral, there's a living amends. And every day I live my life doing a living amends. And in the beginning of my recovery, I wanted my daughter to see I was different. I wanted my husband to see I was different. But people need time to see the changes. They cannot expect me to be changed overnight. It's a process. And I tell you what, I've got 3 years in recovery, and I have put in a lot of inner work since I've been in recovery, and it is showing up in my relationship with my 9-year-old. It is showing up with my relationship with my spouse. But the most important thing about this video is that it is going to suck, and it is going to be painful, and it is going to be hard. If you are a parent and you're getting sober, it's going to be stressful, and it's going to be painful, because there are times where I see my daughter emotionally react, and I feel the guilt in my heart or wherever it comes from. And I feel like, damn, I taught her that, right? But I can separate that guilt from my self-worth, and I can pause in the moment and let her keep doing whatever she's doing until she calms down and until I'm calm enough. Because when my daughter gets dysregulated or gets loud and disorderly, I get extremely dysregulated myself. And so that makes it even more challenging to keep myself regulated while I'm dysregulated and speak nicely and calmly while I'm emotionally, physically dysregulated. But there have been so many times that I have been able to just pause, sit with that dysregulation, separate the guilt, and to just be there, and to just see her, hear her, and understand her, and to let her know, hey, I'm here for you. And I don't have to use words. I can just be present. That's all it takes. Sometimes it just takes me being present. I don't have to baby her. You know, my daughter's in counseling, and I see her counselor separate from my parenting skills. I also work on my parenting skills all the time because I was not taught how to be a mother. So like I say in all my videos, these are skills that have to be taught. And if they're not taught as an adult, it is my responsibility to teach myself these things. But first, I had to develop self-awareness to even be able to identify the things that I needed to change and I needed to improve. And so by me putting my recovery first, and me working on myself, and me learning how to forgive myself, me learning how to emotionally and spiritually connect to myself and see my worth, see I am good enough, I am not my past, I am separate from my emotions. My emotions are not my self-worth. Another person's inability to see my worth is not my problem. You know, I am responsible for my own pain. And so recovery has really healed relationships that I thought would never be healed. And it all started when I started ACA. And also, I want to say this because it's extremely important. You know, I didn't just stop there. Like, I dove deep into researching. I love ChatGTP. One of my sponsors got me hooked on it. And I avoided it so long because I didn't really understand the AI stuff. And I was always Googling stuff. And I finally decided to surrender it and give it a try. And I cannot even emphasize, I can type in, like, how do I communicate with my daughter when she's angry? How can I comfort my daughter when she's upset? Or, you know, I can type in anything in ChatGTP. It will give me a whole lesson plan of what action I can take. And so I don't need to pay for help. I don't, you know, that's the thing with me, is that everything that I have learned, I have taught myself through research, through books, through counseling, because insurance pays for counseling, YouTube, podcasts, books, like I said, like counseling books. I'm sure they're called something else, like self-improvement books, right? And 12-step programs and other recovery programs, and just diving deep into that type of stuff is the reason I'm able to be where I'm at today. I needed to learn all I could learn about who I had become. I needed to understand my brain. And when I learned that I am not my brain, and I am who I hang around, and I am what I feed my brain, right? So if all I have ever fed my brain was addiction and suffering and guilt and shame and resentment, then that's what I'm going to be, unless I take action to fill my brain with things that are going to make me feel good about myself, things that are going to make me feel supported, loved, wanted, heard, seen, understood. And I had to start showing up for myself and changing the way I spoke to myself. And, you know, I speak out loud to myself all the time. I have a set morning schedule, and I printed out a daily reflection from one of my daily reflection books. It's called Buddhism and the 12 Steps. And I really like Buddhism because they actually tell me how to address my emotions. They actually tell me what action I can take to surrender to my emotions, to not allow my emotions to control me. I do not label myself anything. I will take any principle, practice, concept, and if I can apply it to any area of my life for improvement, then that's what I do. And I have it on the fridge, and I switch them up all the time. It's not the same one all the time. And I typed out a daily intention that was supposed to honestly be a couple sentences. When I typed it out, it turned out to be like an entire paragraph, which is fine. And it's hanging on my fridge. So every morning when I wake up and I go in there, because I get ice for my coffee, I read that daily intention out loud. And I don't just read it from my head. I've learned to read it with my heart. And I read that daily reflection. And then I self-reflect out loud on what that meant to me and how that made me feel. And I do that every morning. And there's something powerful about that. There's something powerful about speaking out loud to myself. Extremely powerful. And my daughter sees that. So she is learning through me, you know. I don't hide my recovery, but I also don't talk about war stories and things I used to do in the past. I am very open about how I work through emotions. You know, we recently lost a pet, and that was my daughter's first loss. And I spoke about this in another video, but I lost my shit when I found the bird. I mean, it was pretty intense. The body keeps the score. But because of recovery and because of healing and because of meditation, I was able to self-soothe in front of my daughter. And she was able to see that I was able to self-soothe. And I was able to comfort her and cry and not make it all about me, you know, and all about my pain. I was able to not just show up for her, but to show up for me and her at the same time. And without recovery and without meditation, that would have never been possible. And so my point of making this video is to give parents hope. If you've never been in addiction and you read the laundry list trait from adult children and alcoholics and dysfunctions, a person doesn't have to come from an alcoholic home to take on the characteristics of an alcoholic or a dysfunctional, you know. But when I really started addressing my childhood dysfunction, and you know, I'll end up with this, it wasn't just my family's dysfunction I had brought on these characteristics, it was every single other family, not family member. I started running away when I was like 11, and I would stay with this family, I would stay with that family. I mean, I hopped from house to house. I can't even count how many different families I have stayed with throughout my life. And so not only did I take on my family's characteristics, I took on hundreds of other family, non-family members' characteristics. So that is a lot of different characteristics, right? And you know, ACA is not easy. It's not. It's extremely painful. And I'm not trying to scare people, but if I would have found, when I started ACA, if I honestly feel like if I wouldn't have had that solid foundation in AA, and I wouldn't have had built like new coping mechanisms, a support system, daily routines, and those things that are important to, you know, go into a successful recovery, I'm pretty sure I would have relapsed, or I would have just became depressed again, because I wouldn't have had any tools to help me cope with the pain. And so I'm grateful for 12-step programs. I am grateful for all recovery programs. I am grateful for any information that is available that can help me improve my life in any kind of way. And the workbook I spoke about earlier, Peaceful Parent, Happy Kid, I mean, it's been life-changing, and I still work on it today. Not every day, but like, I have books sitting on my desk, and each day I choose a book to work out of. And it's only for like, sometimes 20 minutes, sometimes 30, depending on how I feel. But I make sure I'm filling myself with that type of stuff, because like I said, 15 years of living in addiction, not being self-aware, having all these survival traits, character defects, whatever you want to call them. You know, it takes time to heal. It takes time to learn new habits. It takes time to learn and to develop a new conditioning, a new programming. And so this is what has worked for me in my recovery, and it's still working for me today. And it takes time to heal relationships with children. And my child is 9, so she's still young. But I have an older child, which is a much more difficult situation, because it takes two people. It takes two people to make a relationship work. And if one person is willing and the other person isn't, nothing will ever change until both people are willing to make the relationship work. So I hope this video can help somebody with whatever they're going through. I really encourage parents to purchase this workbook, because it has been life-changing for me.